things we see on media or we see on television, that we see this fight of people for freedom and for reconciliation. And in this small meeting, I think it will be a great one, maybe small mark for the esteem of the Ukrainian nations toward freedom, equality, and peace. Thank you, Professor. I would like to introduce our friend, Professor Martin Leiner, the President of International Association for Reconciliation Studies, the Director of the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies, and for a couple of words, thank you, dear Martin. And after we will have the presentation after that.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending this conference, and I'm very glad that Benjamin mainly made this connection and made this possible, that we can have a cooperation starting, and I hope that there will be a lot following and many things can be done together, because it's for us very interesting and important to work with you in Ukraine, and very thankful that this happens and that you are here and that we can connect. My name is Martin Leiner. I grew up close to the French border, and I grew up with a reconciliation process between Germany and France. You know, there were many wars between the two countries, and until 3 years before my birth, it was still not with Germany, the country. It was separated from Germany as where I grew up, the Saar country. And by peace, by a lot of efforts of many people for reconciliation, it happens that now such a peaceful and wonderful cooperation is possible in this part of the world. And I think this is something I find much more interesting than all the sad stories you can tell about the world, how this can also happen and can function. I would like to give you a very short presentation now, first of what we are doing in Jena Center, and some very small ideas on how reconciliation can start in the middle of a conflict, and then also very short about the International Association as a possible resource for cooperation worldwide. So can you see now the presentation? Please give me a sign. So thank you very much. So I will move it. So welcome. We are glad that you are here. And my topics are the JCIS, the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies, and some researches and ideas how to initiate reconciliation in the middle of violent conflict. And second is the International Association for Reconciliation Studies. So just one slide for the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies. We started to work more intensively on reconciliation in 2008 with a series of international summer schools. The series has also been published. Now we have 5 volumes on societies and transition. And it's about Latin America, Africa, East Asia, former Soviet Union, Balkans, Caucasus. We have already published volumes and made summer schools, how they evolve in transition processes, and they are between conflict and reconciliation. And this work we will continue, and on this work we could build up this institution also by getting research grants, quite big ones to work with. And then we have also our special approach, that is that reconciliation is transdisciplinary. This means processes how after grave incidents such as atrocities, dictatorships, or wars, civil wars, how people come together again are so complex and include so many elements that you cannot just look at the legal perspective or at the political perspective or the psychological, but you need many aspects and many elements also from culture, from religion, from economy. And this is the idea to look at all these aspects and with working with all these disciplines together to find out better what are factors that processes of reconciliation can succeed, like in Germany and France, or how they can be stopped or not advance or even fail, as has happened, unfortunately, as well in the world. And a second approach that we are working internationally and comparative. We want to compare different cases, and not in order to copy and paste, but to find ideas and suggestions. What could work in one place might work a bit similarly in another place. So we developed theoretical approach and all the pragmatic strategies. We also make a lot of MOUs for cooperation with academic institutions, and we are working as well with policymakers, civil societies, and practitioners. And one quite particular thing in our theory is what we call the Hölderlin perspective. It's called, according to the German poet Friedrich Hölderlin, who was born exactly 250 years ago in southern part of Germany. And he wrote also on reconciliation, and he said reconciliation is in the middle of strife and everything apart find each other again. So our approach is that reconciliation is something which is not after the end of a conflict, but it's transforming a conflict from a violent one into a social one, communicational one. And this transformation can lead to that people find each other, that populations find together again much better. And I put you also the definition of reconciliation on the slide. For us, it's a very broad definition. It's a re-establishment of good or normal relationships within or and after genocides, war, dictatorships, and similar human rights abuses. Not just, you might ask how reconciliation can start in the middle of a conflict, not just some ideas. I start with neuroscience, a German famous neuroscientist, Gerald Hüther from Göttingen University, in a book which is only in German. He claims that the brain is a process which transforms relational experiences into structures. So you have also relational experience to relate to objects in the world or to other persons. And this becomes a structure in your brain. And the structure in your brain you operate with, and it's always, it can change, but it can also become a habit and can be more and more fixed. And there are always more possibilities of relations that the brain can transform into structures than normally people are putting into their brain. So you could connect much more things together, but often it's too much for us, and we only are following some of the relationships. And especially we are following those where we have already structures ready. So if we are reading the world with a structure, for example, of a conflict and of war and of defending ourselves, we integrate what we see into such a structure and see what happens, how the other is behaving according to the structure. So we see only maybe in the eyes of the other some aggression, some anger and such things, but we see not at the same time maybe also the fear or the weakness in the other, or if we see it, we only see it in a way that we interpret it as our good sign that we can now maybe win this conflict in a violent way. So, but if we are looking for different structures, discovering other possibilities, our brain is growing. And this is called learning. If we are not following the old structures, but create new and better relationships, even directly with others. This creates a growth of the brain, and this is learning, and this is increasing intelligence. Especially if the relationships are distressful, we cannot learn much because our whole hormone system is occupied with the fight and flight considerations, and we cannot think a lot about what could be other possibilities. Better relationships and new relationships you create much more in a relaxed state, and you create more connectivity. This is a typical word of Gerhard Hüther. Connectivity is what we should look for in order to make our brain grow. And now, how this can create reconciliation is a creation exactly of new and better relationships, and it's looking for different approaches, and it's a process of learning, of individual and social learning. So reconciliation and intelligence come together. German philosopher and writer Caroline Emke said, hatred is often unprecise. If you hate somebody, you always see only some parts of the reality, and you speak often in stereotypes about the other. But reconciliation can start with a desire to see a more precise and a more complete picture of the people who are called the enemy, to see the whole picture. And this can also lead to elements of reconciliation, like, for example, there might be good memories from the past you had with a person you are now in a conflict with, or countries you are in conflict with. There's a common humanity to discover. There are understanding can be developed. There can be good experiences in the middle of the conflict, and you can perceive possibilities and develop imagination how the future might be better. For all this, I put some pictures. Here, for example, I found this on the internet, and I found this interesting. It's somebody put somebody in a Ukrainian and in a Russian flag, and it's about good memories of individual friendship between Russians and Ukrainians. Somebody wanted to visualize this, and I think there are quite a lot of personal good relationships between many Ukrainians and marriages and Russian people and Ukrainians, like also in many other parts of the world. Or then the common humanity. This is one of the most famous German artists, it's Joseph Beuys, who was an action artist, a very modern artist, and he made very strange objects, like you see on the left here. It's he worked with a lot of fat and with also a lot of a kind of wool. And why did he this? He told a story. He was in the Second World War with a pilot of the German Nazi army, and he was shot down on Crimea, over Crimea, and he was burned in his body and almost dead. And then some people from there picked him up and put him into fat and wool, and this made him survive. So he discovered this humanity of an enemy and this population. They were not fighting people, and they discovered and saw him as well as a human being. Ever since, people said maybe this story is even not historical. He just told it. Maybe he dreamt it when he was in a coma. This could be the case, but even if it's this, it's an example of shared humanity, and it's a story also connecting people in Crimea and people in Germany. And here another example for understanding. One of the most moving moments in the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission was when they talked about an attack on a church, in the St. James Church in Cape Town. It was a perpetrated quite late in '93, so the middle already of the peace process and the reconciliation process, by some people who were sent by a very militant group from a background a bit close to ANC, but not ANC. The strange thing what happened is that those people who went to the church were completely anti-apartheid. Those people had a mixed church service where black people and white people sat together. And even black people were killed in this attack by the black attackers. And how, for this very brutal act with 11 people who died and many were injured, how something could heal even in these processes was that some people try to develop an understanding for the perpetrators, what was not in the beginning the case. There was, for example, one man who served as a soldier in Cyprus many years ago, who had lost his wife in this attack, and he said, well, that they did not look at the people they shot down. I can understand somehow, because when I was as an elite soldier, we had also just orders and had to fulfill them, and we were ordered not to look at anybody and not to see what happens, just to fulfill our orders. And this was a moment where people changed and said, yes, maybe it was something that it was not only completely root killing, but fulfilling and obeying to an order, which have to understand it more this way. So understanding what is behind aggression in an enemy. Food experiences in the middle of a war. This is a quite famous picture. A German soldier on the left, and it gives fire to a British soldier. It was during Christmas time, and during First World War, this famous Christmas truce where fighting stopped, and many soldiers, German, British, Scottish, French, did not fight and played soccer together and had good contact with each other. And this happened as well in the First World War. And I personally know people whose grandfathers told stories that they regularly met their French enemy and talked together, what do you have to eat? And exchanged even meals during the First World War. And then they went back in the trenches and shot each other and killed each other. It's complete foolishness. And now about imagination, I picked an example, the big peace organization, Pax Christi. It was built in southern France by a woman, Martin Leiner, and a Catholic bishop who was also in the resistance against the Nazis. And they had the idea to pray first, to pray for another Europe, and to think for a healing of the German nation, and to get a new relationship, and to do something for the peace in the world together. So people in the middle of a war, it started in 1944 in a small village in southern France, that people created imaginations how things could change. And many people at the end of the Second World War created imagination how things could be better and differently after the Second World War. And this is something which led to many things, from the UN over European Union and many other things. So how to continue if you have maybe those small starts of opening up? So the violent conflict is always a structure and a habit, and the structures of reconciliation and peace can become stronger, but they are fragile, but growing. They can be attacked because people who work for reconciliation can be considered by their own group and own community as traitors. And it's very important to make it clear that they are not. Reconciliation does not mean to give up a just cause. On the contrary, only to fight for the just cause by negotiation, by talking, and by really trying to settle it without so much violence. And in all levels, politicians or in economy or in law, in family or media, things can change, and this can break the structure of war or violence and create other things. I'll show you one picture how to start a positive discourse about the enemy publicly. It's a book of Eric Dockstader. He was working in the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa, and he wrote a book with faith in the work of words. And he claims and describes how a different discourse from both sides in South Africa paved the way towards reconciliation. Or here, Albert Camus, during Second World War, he wrote letters to a German friend, and he distinguished the Germans and the Nazis. And that, there are some Nazis, but not all Germans are Nazis. And this had an impact when it was published after the Second World War. Right? Or other things, maybe the Cold War in the UK, there was a very successful comedy film, not a very deep film, but I still remember it. It was Letter to Brezhnev. It was about a love story between a girl from Liverpool and somebody who came with a ship from Russia, and they were separated and could not meet and marry, and there was a letter written to Brezhnev, and it was a kind of depicting the enemy in a more friendly way from the side of the UK, and to reach out to many normal people who watch comedies of love stories and like to see this. Or in rock music, you had this example also during the Cold War. Udo Lindenberg, German rock musician, he sang a song, A Special Train to Pankow. Pankow is a place in Berlin, in East Berlin, and he wanted to go and to give a concert there. And he made it so strongly in the middle of the Cold War conflict that he succeeded to be invited and to give a concert in East Berlin. And here on the right, if you look well, he read, "Hey honey, keine Panik, no panic, hey honey." Honey is means a typical word you say to your sweetheart in English, but honey was also an abbreviation to Erich Honecker, so the chief of the GDR. And he played with those things, and he was always a very cool person, and so he succeeded in opening something up. Why is it so important? Words and culture, imagination for peace. Often they can already build on something which is there, like cultural sympathy between beyond enmity. There is a respect. There was always a respect between French and German culture, even when there were many wars. Germans loved French philosophy and literature, and vice versa. And there is something we can connect, or same with many other countries around the world. And there are also the direct effects of music, of movies, which can speak to emotions, of words. And there are long-term effects. Songs like Sonderzug nach Pankow from Lindenberg are still in the mind and the ear of many Germans, even years later. And therefore, I think those cultural ways of connecting are very strong and symbolic and could contribute to changes. The next step may follow, such international diplomacy, visits, But it's always not easy, and but it's the only way to go. We make peace not with friends, but with enemies. If not, we cannot make peace. Peace must be done with enemies, and this risk must be taken. So far, just for a little, let us say, teaser or invitation to some thoughts about starting reconciliation in the middle of conflict. And now a few words to the International Association for Reconciliation Studies, together with Professor Toyomo Asano from Tokyo and Karina Korestelina. We prepared during much more than 1 year to start an international association for reconciliation studies, and it was founded in August 2020 in Jena. And it would invite you also to think about maybe joining, provide you with a global and multidisciplinary network so you could connect with people who are working on Argentina or on Rwanda or on Australia, wherever, through this association. There will be a newsletter announcing conferences, publications, jobs openings, and interesting news. We want to create an online journal, and there will be also an annual conference which will be held next August in Tokyo, and Professor Asano will be the one who invites, and maybe you can also address directly to him. So thank you very much for your attention. Here a photo with Desmond Tutu and also a professor from South Africa, Christo Tesna. I think Desmond Tutu is very much from my approach, a model, a role model of reconciliation work. Thank you very much, and have a good continuation of this conference.
Okay, thank you, dear Professor Leiner. It was very inspiring and very wide. So from this presentation, we can see the concepts that are going on different sides. So we can choose, we can see, we can understand, and everyone, I think, can take something for himself to accept something. Thank you.